Hello everyone. So I'm getting set up and getting everything together. We do have a 16-page segment to get through today. Also my chair broke yesterday, so I'm a little taller than I normally am, but we're working through it. I'll be right back. Hopefully by next week I'll have contacts. We know the struggle I'm going through of not being able to see the paper unless I hold it up close. So if at any point I'm blocking my face, I do apologize. Can't really help it right now. But today's case is on Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Ricardo Richard Leyva Munoz Ramirez, dubbed Night Stalker, Valley Intruder, as his attacks were first clustered in the San Gabriel Valley, and Walk-In Killer, was an American serial killer whose crime spree took place in California between July 1984 and August 1985. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1989. He died in 2013 while awaiting execution. I'm sitting up so high it's hard to... Okay. Ramirez's childhood is considered an influence on his crimes. Abused by his father, Ramirez began developing gruesome macabre interests in his early and mid-teens from his older cousin Miguel, aka Mike. Ramirez who allegedly taught him some of the military skills that he would go on to use during his year-long killing spree. Ramirez also cultivated a strong interest in Satanism and the occult. Now, I just want to point out that not all Satanists are evil. The occult is not necessarily evil. It's what you do with your interest, or your magic, or your witchcraft, or whatever. It's what you do with it that makes you evil, not the actual act of being a Satanist or in the occult. By the time he had left his home in Texas and moved to California at the age of 22, he had begun frequently using cocaine. Ramirez would often commit burglaries in support of his drug addiction, many of which were later frequently accompanied by murders, attempted murders, rapes, and assaults. Ramirez's highly publicized home invasion and murder spree terrorized the residents of the greater Los Angeles area and later the San Francisco Bay Area over the course of 14 months. However, because there's always a however, his first known murders occurred as early as April 1984. This crime was not connected to Ramirez, nor was it known to be his doing until 2009. Ramirez used a wide variety of weapons and different murder methods, including handguns, various types of knives, a machete, tire iron, a claw hammer. He punched, pistol whipped, and strangled many of his victims, both with his hands and in one instance a ligature, stomped at least one victim to death in her sleep, and tortured another victim by shocking her with a live electrical cord. Ramirez also enjoyed frequently degrading and humiliating his victims. Sorry, I wanted to get that done around my mouth. Especially those who survived his attacks or whom he explicitly decided not to kill by forcing them to profess that they love Satan or telling them to swear on Satan. If there were no more valuables left in their homes, he had broken into and burglarized. Richard Ramirez, I guess, was just a little extra. I mean, you do you, I guess. In 1989, Ramirez was convicted of the 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The judge who upheld Ramirez's 19 death sentences remarked that his deeds exhibited cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Ramirez never expressed any remorse for his crimes. He died on June 7, 2013 of complications from B-cell lymphoma while awaiting execution on California's death row. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, if you ask me. Ricardo Richard Lavoya Munoz Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas on February 29th, 1960, to Julian and Mercedes Ramirez, the youngest of their 5 children. His father, Julian, a Mexican national, Mexican national, and former Ciudad, did I say that right, baby? Ciudad Ramirez policeman, who later became a laborer on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, was an alcoholic who was prone to fits of anger that often resulted in physical abuse towards his wife and children. Now, I just always point this out in every segment I do, that not every child that has been abused by their family grows up to murder people. There is a lot of misconception around that. I mean, yes, it can have an impact on said serial killers who were actually abused by their parents or whatever, but it doesn't mean that every child that's ever been abused is going to grow up to be a serial killer. I've seen that a lot in my comments, so yeah. Some grow up to do the right thing and be better than what they were raised as. Some do not. Just depends. Richard began smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol at the age of 10. As a 12-year-old, if I can speak English, that would probably help. Richard, or Richie, as he was known to his family, was strongly influenced by his older cousin, Miguel, a decorated Green Beret combat veteran who himself had already become a serial killer and a rapist during his time in the United States Army in the Vietnam War. Mike often boasted of his brutal war crimes and shared Polaroid photos with Richard showing Vietnamese women who he had raped, murdered, and dismembered or decapitated. Richard would later state, while incarcerated, that he was fascinated rather than repulsed by the images and stories Mike shared with him. Mike taught his young cousin some of his military skills, such as killing with stealth and effectively staying hidden in the dark, especially at night. Around this time, Richard began to seek escape from his father's violent temper by sleeping in a local cemetery. Richard was present on May 4th, 1973, when Mike fatally shot his wife, Jessie, in the face with a handgun during a domestic argument. Like the graphic photos and stories of his cousin's war crimes in Vietnam, Ramirez would later similarly remark that witnessing the murder was not traumatic for him in any traditional sense, but rather a subject of fascination. After the shooting, Richard became sullen and withdrawn from his family and peers. Mike was later found not guilty of Jesse's murder by reason of insanity, with the shooting attributed to post-traumatic stress disorder from his service in Vietnam. He was confined for several years at the Texas State Mental Hospital. This thing is killing my back. Stool. Fuck, I don't remember what I just read. Shortly after the shooting, Richard moved in with his older sister, Ruth, and her husband, Roberto. An obsessive peeping Tom, who took Richard along on his nocturnal exploits. After Mike was released from the mental hospital in 1977, he sometimes accompanied Richard and Roberto on those voyeuristic walks, spying on women in the nearby areas through their windows. By the time Richard had turned 14 in early 1974, he began using LSD frequently. He and Mike resumed bonding over their shared use of drugs and alcohol. It was during this period that Richard began to cultivate an interest in Satanism and the occult. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to finish the more complicated processes off camera that I need to do with like my eyes and stuff, and then I will come back and we will finish the segment. Okay, shortly after the shooting, Richard moved in with his... When he reached adolescence, Richard Ramirez began to meld his burgeoning sexual fantasies with graphic violence, including forced bondage, BDSM, murder, mutilation, and rape. While still in school, he took a job at the local Holiday Inn. And used his pass key to rob sleeping patrons. On at least one occasion, Ramirez molested 2 children in an elevator at the hotel, but he was never reported or prosecuted for this act. His employment ended abruptly after Ramirez attempted to rape a woman in her hotel room and was caught in the act by the victim's husband. I mean, I guess that's a good reason to fire somebody, right? Although the husband beat Ramirez at the scene, criminal charges were dropped when the couple, who lived out of state, declined to return to Texas to testify against him. Ramirez dropped out of high school in 9th grade in 1982 at the age of 22. He moved to and settled permanently in California. It was around this time that Ramirez started to use cocaine, which quickly became his substance of choice, and began to commit theft and burglaries to procure money for sustaining his addiction. He lived nomadically between San Francisco and Los Angeles County during this time, prior to his incarceration. He frequently traveled between the northern and southern areas of California, both before and during his year-long crime spree. On April 10th, damn it, I broke it. April 10th, 1984, Ramirez murdered Mei Luang, 9, a Chinese-American girl, in the basement of his apartment building in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Luang was with her 8-year-old brother and looking for a lost $1 bill when Ramirez approached the girl and told her to follow him into the basement to find it. Once they were in the basement, Ramirez beat, strangled, and raped Luang before stabbing her to death with a switchblade, hanging her partially nude body from a pipe by her blouse. The killing was not linked to Ramirez until 2009, when his DNA was matched to a sample obtained at the crime scene. In 2016, disclosed evidence of a second suspect identified through another DNA sample retrieved from the scene, who is believed to have been present at Luang's murder. Authorities have not publicly identified the suspect, described as being a juvenile at the time, and have not brought charges due to the lack of evidence. On June 28th, 79-year-old Jenny Venkow was found murdered in her apartment. Hold on a second. We're having some difficulty here. I gotta find... She had been stabbed repeatedly in her head, neck, and chest while asleep in her bed, and her throat slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. His victimology is like all over the map. Male, female, young, old, in between. It really didn't seem to matter. It was more just the thrill of killing. Okay, so Ramirez's fingerprint was found on a mesh screen he removed to gain access through an open window. This Ramirez's second known murder established his pattern of breaking into homes, committing particularly vicious murders, and frequently burglarizing his victims. Either before or after killing them, which was mainly to support his cocaine addiction and pay his rent. On March 17th, 1985, Ramirez attacked 22-year-old Maria Hernandez outside her home in Rosemead, California, shooting her in the face with a .22 caliber handgun after she pulled into her garage. She survived with a bullet ricocheted off the keys she held in her hands as she lifted them to protect herself. Hernandez played dead until Ramirez left the scene. Inside the house, her roommate, Dale Yoshi Okazaki, 34, heard the gunshot and ducked behind a counter when she saw Ramirez enter the kitchen. When she raised her head to get a look at what had happened, he shot Okazaki once in the forehead, killing her instantly. Within an hour of the Rosemead home invasion, Ramirez pulled Cy Leanne Veronica Yu, 30, out of her car in Monterey Park, shot her twice with a .22 caliber handgun, and fled. She was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. The two murders and attempted third in a single day attracted extensive coverage from news media, who dubbed the attacker, described as curly-haired with bulging eyes and wide-spaced rotting teeth, the walk-in killer and the Valley Intruder. On March 27th, 1985, Ramirez entered a home that he had burglarized a year earlier just outside of Whittier, California, at approximately 2 a.m. and killed the sleeping Vincent Charles Zazaria, 64, with a gunshot to his head from a .22 caliber handgun. Vincent's wife, Maxine Lavinia Zazara, 44, was awakened by the gunshot, and Ramirez beat her and bound her hands while demanding to know where her valuables were. While he ransacked the room, Maxine escaped her bonds and retrieved a shotgun from under the bed, which was not loaded. The infuriated Ramirez shot her 3 times with a .22, then fetched a large carving knife from the kitchen. He mutilated her body by stabbing her several times, then removed her eyes with the knife and placed them in a jewelry box, which he took when he left, and kept at this apartment as a souvenir until his arrest. The autopsy determined that the mutilations were post-mortem. Vincent and Maxine's bodies were discovered by their son, Peter. Ramirez left footprints from a pair of Avia sneakers in the flower beds, which the police photographed and cast. This was virtually the only evidence that the police had at that time. Bullets found at the scene were matched to those found at previous attacks, and the police determined that a serial killer was... On May 14th, 1985, Ramirez returned to Monterey Park and entered the home of Bill Doy, 66, and his disabled wife, Lillian, also 56. Surprising Doy in his bedroom, Ramirez shot Bill in the face with a .22 semi-automatic pistol as Bill went for his own handgun. After beating the mortally wounded man in unconsciousness, Ramirez entered Lillian's bedroom, bound her with thumb cuffs, then raped her after he ransacked the home for valuables. Bill Doy died of his injuries while in the hospital. On the night of May 29th, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Monrovia and stopped at the house of Mabel Ma Bell, 83, and her disabled sister, Florence Nettie Lang, 81. Finding a hammer in the kitchen, he bludgeoned and bound Lang in her bedroom, then bound and bludgeoned Bell before using an electrical cord to shock the woman. After raping Florence, he used Mabel's lipstick to draw the satanic pentagram symbol on her thigh, as well as on the walls of both bedrooms. The women were found 2 days later, but comatose and critically injured. Mabel later died of her injuries in the hospital. The next day, Ramirez drove the same car to Burbank and sneaked into the home of Carol Kyle, 42. At gunpoint, he bound Carol and her son, 11, with handcuffs, then ransacked the house. He released Carol to direct him to where the family's valuables were. He then raped her repeatedly. Ramirez also reportedly ordered her not to look at him, telling her at one point that he would cut her eyes out. He fled the scene after retrieving the child from the closet and binding the two together again with the handcuffs. On the night of July 2nd, 1985, he drove a stolen car to Arcadia and randomly selected the house of Mary Louise Cannon, 75, a widowed grandmother. After quietly entering Mary Louise's home, he found her asleep in her bedroom. He bludgeoned her into unconsciousness with a lamp and then stabbed her to death using a 10-inch butter knife from her kitchen. Ramirez repeatedly stabbed Mary Louise's body after she was already dead. She was found dead at the scene. On July 5th, 1985, Ramirez broke into a home in Sierra Madre and bludgeoned Whitney Bennett, 16, with a tire iron as she slept in her bedroom. After searching in vain for a knife in the kitchen, Ramirez tried to strangle the girl with a telephone cord. He stated that he was startled to see electrical sparks emanate from the cord, and when his victim began to breathe, he fled the house believing that Jesus Christ had intervened and saved her. Bennett survived the savage beating and attempted strangulation, although 478 stitches were required to close the lacerations to her scalp. On July 7, 1985, Ramirez burglarized the home of Joyce Lucille Nelson, 60, in Monterey Park. Finding her asleep on her living room couch, he beat her to death by stomping her face repeatedly. Sorry guys, I burnt myself. A shoe print from an Avia sneaker was left imprinted on her face. After cruising 2 other neighborhoods, he returned to Monterey Park and chose the home of Sophie Dickman, 63. Ramirez assaulted and handcuffed Dickman at gunpoint, attempted to rape her, and stole her jewelry. When she swore to him that he had taken everything of value, he told her to swear on Satan. On July 20th, 1985, Ramirez purchased a machete before driving a stolen Toyota to Glendale, California. He chose the home of Leila Needing, 66, and her husband Maxon, 68. He burst into the sleeping couple's bedroom and hacked them with a machete before robbing the house of valuables. After quickly fencing the stolen items from the Needing residence, Ramirez drove to Sun Valley. At approximately 4:15 a.m., he broke into the home of, God forbid me, I'm going to butcher this one, Kahovananath family. He shot the sleeping Shanarong in the head with a .25. caliber handgun, killing him instantly, then repeatedly raped and beat Somid. He bound the couple's 8-year-old son in his bedroom before dragging Somid around the house to reveal the location of any valuable items, which he stole. During this assault, he demanded that she swear to Satan that she was not hiding any money from him. On August 6, 1985, Ramirez drove to Northridge and broke into the home of Chris and Virginia Peterson. He snuck into the bedroom, startled Virginia, 27, and shot her in the face with a .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun. He then shot Chris in the neck and attempted to flee. Chris fought back while avoiding 2 more shots during the struggle before Ramirez managed to escape. Both Chris and Virginia survived their attack. On August 8, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Diamond Bar, California, and chose the home of Sakina Abawath, 27, and her husband Elias Abawath, 31. Sometime after 2:30 a.m., he entered the house and went into the master bedroom. He then instantly killed the sleeping Elias with a shot to the head from a .25 caliber handgun. He handcuffed and beat Sakina while forcing her to reveal the locations of the family's jewelry, and then brutally raped her. He repeatedly demanded that she swear on Satan that she would not scream during his assault. When the couple's 3-year-old son entered the bedroom, Ramirez tied the child up and they continued to rape Sakina. After Ramirez left the home, Sakina untied her son and sent him to the neighbors for help. Ramirez, who had been following the media coverage of his crimes, left Los Angeles and headed to San Diego. On August 18, 1985, he entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan, who shot the sleeping Peter, 66, in the temple with a .25 caliber handgun, which killed him instantly. He then beat and sexually assaulted Barbara, 62, before shooting her in the head and leaving her for dead. At the crime scene, Ramirez used lipstick to scrawl a pentagram and the phrase, "Jack the Knife," on the bedroom wall. Ramirez again left a shoe print at the scene that detectives discovered and matched to a specific pair of Avia shoes that was not common at the time. Lead detectives Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo, who contributed to Netflix's Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, contacted the manufacturer of Avia shoes and were able to retrieve the soles. Upon the discovery of the make and distribution across the United States, only 6 of them existed in the size 11.5, with 5 of them shipped to locations in Arizona and 1 shipped to a shoe store in Los Angeles. It was evident that the 1 pair of its size and kind in the state of California then belonged to Ramirez. When it was discovered that the ballistics and shoe print evidence from the Los Angeles crime scenes matched the Pan crime scene, San Francisco's then mayor, Dianne Feinstein, divulged the information, including the gun caliber, in a televised press conference. This leak infuriated the detectives in the case, as they knew the killer would be following media coverage, which gave him opportunity to destroy crucial forensic evidence. Ramirez, who had indeed been watching the press, dropped his size 11.5 Avia sneakers over the side of the Golden Gate Bridge that night. He remained in the area for a few more days before heading back to the Los Angeles area. On August 24th, 1985, Ramirez traveled 76 miles south of Los Angeles in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo. That night, he arrived at the home of James Romero Jr., who had just returned from a family vacation to Rosarito Beach in Mexico. Romero's son, James Romero III, 13, happened to be awake. While his family was asleep, James went outside of his house to retrieve a pillow inside a truck, which was locked. When he was outside, he heard a rustling noise. Assuming it was an animal, James went to investigate the noise, but did not notice anything unordinary. James then went into his garage to begin working on his mini bike before hearing Ramirez's footsteps outside the house. Thinking there was a prowler, James, after observing Ramirez through his bedroom window, went to wake his parents, and Ramirez fled the scene. James raced outside and noted the color, make, and style of the car, as well as a partial license plate number. Romero contacted the police with this information, believing James had chased away a thief. After this encounter, Ramirez broke into the house of Bill Carnes, 30, and his fiancée Inez Erickson, 29, through a back door. Ramirez entered the sleeping couple's bedroom and awakened Bill when he cocked his .25 caliber handgun. He shot Bill 3 times in the head before turning his attention to Inez. Ramirez told her that he was the Night Stalker and forced her to swear she loved Satan as he beat her with his fists and bound her with neckties from the closet. After stealing what he could find, Ramirez dragged Inez to another room before raping her. He then demanded cash and more jewelry and made her swear on Satan there was no more. Before leaving the home, Ramirez told Inez, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." Inez untied herself and went to a neighbor's house to get help for her severely injured fiancé. Surgeons removed 2 of the 3 bullets from his head. He survived his injuries. Inez gave a detailed description of the assailant to investigators, and police obtained a cast of Ramirez's footprint from the Romero house. The stolen Toyota was found abandoned on August 28th in Koreatown, Los Angeles, and police obtained a single fingerprint from the rearview mirror despite Ramirez's careful efforts to wipe the car clean of his prints. The print was positively identified as belonging to Ramirez, who was described as a 25-year-old drifter from Texas with a log rap sheet That included many arrests for traffic and illegal drug violations. The identification of Ramirez's print was described as a near miracle, as the system used to identify him was recently installed, as well as the fact that the system contained the fingerprints of criminals born after January 1st, 1960, only a month before Ramirez was born. On August 29th, 1985, law enforcement officials decided to release a mugshot of Ramirez from a 1984 arrest for auto theft to the media, and the Night Stalker finally had a face. At the police press conference, it was announced, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place you can hide." On the night of June 27, 1985, Patty Elaine Higgins, 32, was murdered in her Arcadia home. The crime was not discovered until July 2nd, when she did not show up for work. Her attacker had sodomized her, strangled her, and slashed her throat. Ramirez was charged with murder and burglary in relation to Higgins' murder. However, the charges against him in this case were eventually dropped due to a lack of concrete physical evidence linking the Higgins murder to the Night Stalker crimes. Based on a statement Ramirez made to an investigator, he is also a suspect in the San Francisco double murder of Christina and Mary Caldwell. The Caldwell sisters were found stabbed to death in their Telegraph apartment on February 20th, 1985. While incarcerated, Ramirez openly bragged to a prison officer and other inmates about having killed more than 20 people. On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, unaware that he had become the lead story in virtually every major newspaper and television news program across California. After failing to meet his brother due to him not being home, Ramirez returned to Los Angeles early on the morning of August 31st. He walked past police officers who were staking out the bus terminal in hopes of catching the killer should he attempt to flee on an outbound bus and into a convenience store in East Los Angeles. After noticing a group of elderly Hispanic women fearfully identifying him as El Matador, literally the killer in Spanish, Ramirez saw his face on the front page of the newspaper La Opinion, with a headline calling him Invasor Nocturno, Night Invader, and fled the store in a panic. After running across the Santa Ana Freeway, I-5, he attempted to carjack an unlocked Ford Mustang, but was pulled out by angry resident Faustino Pinon. Ramirez ran across the street and attempted to take car keys from Angelina de la Torre. The woman's husband, Manuel de la Torre, witnessed the attempt and struck Ramirez over the head with a fence post in the pursuit. A group of over 10 residents formed and chased Ramirez down Hubbard Street in Boyle Heights. The group of citizens forced and held Ramirez down and relentlessly beat him. At around 8 a.m., police were called over a disturbance in the area with a few details with indications of a fight. Police quickly arrived at the 3700 block of Hubbard and found that Ramirez was severely beaten, unarmed, and took him into custody. The crowd grew to several hundred people and was becoming unruly toward Ramirez, and responding officer Andy Ramirez, no relation, stayed behind while Officer Jim Kaiser drove Ramirez to the Hollenbeck police station. On August 14th, the trial was interrupted because one of the jurors, Phyllis Singletary, did not arrive at the courtroom. Later that day, she was found shot to death in her apartment. The jury was terrified, wondering if Ramirez had somehow directed this event from inside his prison cell and whether or not he could reach other jurors. However, it was ultimately determined that Ramirez was not responsible for Singletary's death, as she was shot and killed by her boyfriend, who later committed suicide with the same weapon in a hotel. The alternate juror who replaced Singletary was too frightened to return to her home. On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was convicted of all charges: 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. During the penalty phase of the trial on November 7, 1989, he was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber. He stated to reporters after the death sentence, quote, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland," end quote. The trial cost $1.8 million, $3.93 million, and 2021 dollars, which at the time made it the most expensive in the history of California until surpassed by the O.J. Simpson murder trial in 1994. By the time of trial, Ramirez had fans who were writing him letters and paying him visits. Beginning in 1985, Doreen Leoy wrote him nearly 75 letters during his incarceration. In 1988, Ramirez proposed to Leoy, and on October 3, 1996, they were married in California's San Quentin State Prison. For many years before Ramirez's death, Leoy stated that she would commit suicide when Ramirez was executed. However, Leoy eventually left Ramirez in 2009 after DNA confirmed he had raped and murdered 9-year-old May Leon. By the time of his death in 2013, Ramirez was engaged to a 23-year-old writer. On August 7, 2006, Ramirez's first round of state appeals ended unsuccessfully when the California State Supreme Court upheld his convictions and death sentence. On September 7, 2006, the California Supreme Court denied his request for a rehearing. Ramirez had additional appeals pending until the time of his death. Psychiatrist Michael H. Stone describes Ramirez as a made psychopath as opposed to a born psychopath. He says that Ramirez's schizoid personality disorder contributed to his indifference to the suffering of his victims and his intreatability. Stone also stated that Ramirez was knocked unconscious and almost died on multiple occasions before he was 6 years old, and as a result later developed temporal lobe epilepsy, aggressivity, and hypersexuality. Ramirez died of complications secondary to B-cell lymphoma at Marin General Hospital in Green Bay, California on June 7, 2013. He had also been infected by chronic substance abuse and chronic hepatitis C viral infection. That is today's segment on Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please be kind and respectful in the comments. These are real people. Just keep that in mind when you're making comments. As always, be cautiously kind to others. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Do what's right for you. And just make better choices in life than the people I tell you about. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. Bye.